We now begin Chapter 6 in The Rape of the Mind by Juste A.M. Merleau, M.D. Totalitarian and its dictatorship. There actually exists such a thing as a technique of mass brainwashing. This technique can take root in a country if an inquisitor is strong and shrewd enough. He can make most of us his victims, albeit temporarily. What in the structure of society has made man so vulnerable to these mass manipulations of the mind? This is a problem with tremendous implications, just as brainwashing is. In recent years, we have grown more and more aware of human interdependence with all its difficulties and complications. I am aware of the fact that investigation of the subject of mental coercion and thought control becomes less pleasant as time goes on. This is so because it may become more of a threat to us here and now, and our concern for China and Korea must yield to the more immediate needs at our own door. Can totalitarian tendencies take over here, and what social symptoms may lead to such phenomena? Stern reality confronts us with the universal mental battle between thought control and its corollaries and our standards of decency, personal strength and personal ideas, and a personal conscience with autonomy and dignity. Future social sciences will be better able to describe the causes of the advent of totalitarian thinking and acting in man. We know that after wars and revolutions, this mental deterioration more easily finds an opportunity to develop, helped by special psychopathic personalities who only flourish on man's misery and confusion. It is also true that the next generation spontaneously begins to correct the misdeeds of the previous one because the ruthless system has become too threatening to them. My task, however, is to describe some symptoms of the totalitarian process, which implies deterioration of thinking and acting, as I have observed them in our own epoch, keeping in mind that the system is one of the most violent distortions of man's consistent mental growth. No brainwashing is possible without totalitarian thinking. The tragic facts of political experiences in our age make it all too clear that applied psychological technique can brainwash entire nations and reduce their citizens to a kind of mindless robotism which becomes for them a normal way of living. Perhaps we can best understand how this frightening thing comes about by examining a mythical country, which for the sake of convenience we shall call Totalitaria. The robotization of man. First, let me utter a word of caution. We must not make the mistake of thinking that there is any one particular nation that can be completely identified with this hypothetical land. The characteristics to be discussed can come into existence here. Some of totalitaria's characteristics were, of course, present in Nazi Germany, and they can today be found behind the Iron Curtain, but they exist to some extent in other parts of the world as well. Totalitaria is any country in which political ideas degenerate into senseless formulations made only for propaganda purposes. It is any country in which a single group, left or right, acquires absolute power and becomes omniscient and omnipotent. Any country which disagreement and differences of opinion are crimes, in which utter conformity is the price of life. Totalitaria, the Leviathan state, is the home of the political system we call, euphemistically, totalitarianism, of which systematized tyranny is a part. This system does not derive from any honest political philosophy, either socialist or capitalist. Totalitarian leaders may mouth ideologies, but these are in fact mainly catchwords used to justify this regime. If necessary, totalitarianism can change its slogans and its behavior overnight. For totalitarianism embodies to me the quest for total power, the quest of a dictator to rule the world. The words and concepts of socialism and communism may serve, like democracy, as a disguise for the megalomaniac intent of the tyrant. Since totalitarianism is essentially the social manifestation of a psychological phenomenon belonging to every personality, it can be best understood in terms of the human forces that create, foster, and perpetuate it. Man has two faces. He wants to grow toward maturity and freedom, and yet the primitive child in his unconscious yearns for complete protection and irresponsibility. His mature self learns how to cope with the restrictions and frustrations of daily life, but at the same time the child in him longs to hit out against them, to beat them down, to destroy them, whether they be objects or people. Totalitarianism appeals to this confused infant in all of us. It seems to offer a solution to the problem man's double yearning creates. Our mythical totalitaria is a monolithic and absolute state in which doubt, confusion, and conflict are not permitted to be shown, for the dictator purports to solve all his subjects' problems for them. In addition, totalitaria can provide official sanction for the expression of man's most antisocial impulses. The uncivilized child hidden in us may welcome this liberation from ethical frustrations. On the other hand, our free social selves cannot be happy in totalitaria. They revolt against the restriction of individual impulses. The psychological roots of totalitarianism are usually irrational, destructive, and primitive, though disguised behind some ideology, and for this reason there is something fantastic, unbelievable, even nightmarish about the system itself. There is, of course, a difference in the psychic experience of the elite, who can live out their needs for power, and the masses who have to submit, yet the two groups influence each other. When a dictator's deep neurotic needs for power also satisfy some profound emotional need in the population of his country, especially in times of misery or after a revolution, he is more easily able to assume the power for which he longs. If a nation has suffered defeat in war, for example, its citizens feel shame and resentment. Loss of face is not simply a political abstraction. It is a very real and personal thing to a conquered people. Every man, consciously or unconsciously, identifies with his native land. If a country suffers from prolonged famine or severe depression, its citizens become bitter, depressed, and resentful, and will more willingly accept the visions and promises of the aspiring dictator. If the complexity of a country's political and economic apparatus makes the individual citizen feel powerless, confused, and useless, if he has no sense of participation in the forces that govern his daily life, or if he feels these forces to be so vast and confusing that he can no longer understand them, he will grasp at the totalitarian opportunity for belonging, for participation, for a simple formula that explains and rationalizes what is beyond his comprehension. And when the dictator has taken over finally, he transfers his own abnormal fantasies, his rage and anger easily to his subjects. Their resentment feed his. His pseudo-strength encourages them. A mutual fortification of illusions takes place. Totalitarianism as a social manifestation is a disease of interhuman relations, and like any other disease, man can best resist its corroding effects if, through knowledge and training, he is well immunized against it. If, however, he is unfortunate enough to catch the totalitarian bug, he has to muster all the positive forces in his mind to defeat it. The raging internal struggle between the irresponsible child and the mature adult in him continues until one or the other is finally destroyed completely. As long as a single spark of either remains, the battle goes on. And for as long as man is alive, the quest for maturity keeps on. Cultural predilection for totalitarianism. In the battle against this dread disease, social factors as well as personal ones play an important role. We can see this more clearly if we analyze the ways in which the ideals of a culture as a whole affect its citizens' vulnerability to totalitarianism. The ethics of our own Western civilization are our strongest defenses against the disease, for the ideal of these ethics is to produce a breed of men and women who are strongly individualistic and who evaluate situations primarily in terms of their own consciences. We aim to develop in our citizens a sense of self-responsibility, a willingness to confront the world as it is, and an ability to distinguish between right and wrong through their own feelings and thoughts. Such men and women are impelled to action by their personal moral standards rather than by what some outside group sets up as correct. They are unwilling to accept group evaluations immediately unless these coincide with their own personal convictions or unless they have been able to discuss them in a democratic way. People like this are responsible to their communities because they are first responsible to themselves. If they disagree, they will form a loyal minority, using their rights of convincing other people at appropriate times. And we will pick up with Chapter 6 in the next video. This was Part 1 of Chapter 6. And this is The Rape of the Mind, The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing by Juice A.M. Merleau, M.D. See you there.